The Oregon dusk cast a somber veil over the Port Haven funeral home, its stained glass windows glowing faintly under flickering streetlights. Inside, the air was heavy with grief and the scent of lilies, the murmurs of mourners barely audible over the minister's soft prayers. At the center of the viewing room, Chief Brian Walsh's mahogany coffin stood, draped in a silk flag, his dress blues gleaming with medals. The crowd's muffled sobs broke the hush, but a piercing howl shattered the solemnity. A black German shepherd, Ranger, stood rigid, his scarred muzzle quivering, his brown eyes locked on the coffin. His desperate barks echoed, drowning out the service. James Carter, 46, a detective with salt and pepper hair, his leather jacket creased, stood at the back, his weathered face taut. His hands clenched, a familiar ache from his Marine days stirring. Beside him, Evelyn Walsh, 55, Brian's widow, her auburn hair streaked with silver, her teacher's cardigan neat, gripped a tissue, her eyes wide with shock. She'd insisted Ranger attend, but now she feared what his frenzy meant. "Get that dog out!" Deputy Chief Alan Kessler, 49, his blonde hair slicked, his uniform crisp, barked, his face flushed with anger. "Show some respect!" Two officers lunged for Ranger's leash, but the dog broke free, charging the coffin, toppling floral arrangements with a crash. Mourners gasped, Evelyn's hand flying to her mouth, her voice trembling. "James, what's wrong with him?" Carter stepped forward, his heart pounding, recognizing Ranger's alert stance from countless crime scenes. This wasn't grief. Ranger was signaling danger. "Hold on," Carter said, his voice low, steady, cutting through the chaos. "He's trying to tell us something." Kessler's eyes narrowed, his voice sharp. "Carter, don't make a scene. Remove him, now." Ranger's howls turned frantic, his teeth tearing at the coffin's silk lining, claws scraping wood. Sophie Carter, 16, James's niece, her brown hair tucked under a hoodie, pushed through the crowd, her voice desperate. "Uncle James, Ranger's never wrong. He knows something." Evelyn's tears fell, her voice breaking. "Brian loved him, James. If Ranger's acting like this, please listen to him." Carter's gaze locked on the dog, memories of Brian's mentorship, saving him from juvenile detention at 16, flooding back. "Open it," Carter commanded, his voice rising, silencing the room. "Open the coffin now." The crowd froze, Kessler's face paling, his voice a hiss. "This is insanity, Carter. You're desecrating Brian's memory." But Evelyn's hand gripped Carter's arm, her voice fierce. "Do it, James, for Brian." The funeral director, trembling, hesitated, looking to Evelyn, who nodded, tears streaming. "I'm his wife." "Open it." Ranger's howls crescendoed, his body straining as the director unlocked the brass latches. The lid creaked open, revealing Brian, still in his blues, hands folded. For a moment silence held. Then Doctor. Rachel Nguyen, 38, her black hair tied back, her coroner's blouse crisp, pushed forward, her fingers pressing Brian's neck. "There's a pulse," she gasped, her voice sharp, cutting through the shock. "He's alive!" Chaos erupted. Mourners screamed. Officers surged forward, Evelyn collapsing against Sophie, sobbing. "Brian! Oh God, Brian!" Ranger's barks turned triumphant, his tail whipping, but Carter's eyes caught Kessler. Frozen, his face not joyful but horrified, as if a nightmare had unfolded. Rachel's voice was urgent, her hands checking Brian's vitals. "Ambulance now! He's been drugged! Tetrodotoxin, I'd bet." "It mimics death." Carter's phone was out, calling for medics, his voice clipped, but his gaze never left Kessler, whose hand twitched toward his belt. The twist landed like a thunderbolt. Rachel's fingers brushed Brian's collar, finding a tiny puncture mark, barely visible, surrounded by a faint bruise. "This isn't natural," she whispered, her voice low, for Carter alone. "Someone poisoned him, deliberately." Evelyn's sob choked, her voice raw. "Poisoned? Who'd do this to him?" Ranger's growl returned, his nose snapping toward Kessler, who stepped back, his voice shaky.
"This is absurd. He had a heart attack."
But Carter's blood ran cold, his voice a growl.
"You were quick to bury him, Allen."
Why the rush? The medic stormed in, gurney rattling, as Brian was whisked away, Evelyn clinging to his hand. Ranger stayed at Carter's side, his eyes fierce, a vow to protect. The funeral home was now a crime scene, and Carter knew Brian's survival was just the beginning, and Ranger's howl had uncovered a deadly truth. The Oregon dawn bathed Port Haven in a muted gray, the coastal town's quiet streets lined with weathered clapboard houses and shuttered factories, a shadow of its once thriving past. James Carter sat on the sagging porch of his modest bungalow, his salt and pepper hair tousled, his leather jacket slung over a chair, a cold coffee mug in his hands. At 46, the detective's face bore the weight of loss. His wife Emily gone 3 years to cancer, and the shock of Chief Brian Walsh's survival, pulled from a coffin yesterday thanks to Ranger's howls. The black German shepherd lay in the yard, his scarred muzzle still, his brown eyes scanning the fog, his ribs less stark now, but his spirit wary. Once a K-9 hero, Ranger's retirement after a warehouse explosion hadn't dulled his instincts. Evelyn Walsh, 55, her auburn hair streaked with silver, her teacher's cardigan frayed, sat beside James, her hands trembling. Sophie Carter, 16, James's niece, her brown hair tucked under a hoodie, knelt by Ranger, her voice soft. "He's okay, right, Uncle James?" The funeral home's chaos, Brian alive, poisoned, hung heavy, and Port Haven's opioid crisis loomed like a storm. "Ranger's a fighter, Soph," James said, his voice low, raw, his gaze on the dog. "Just like Brian." Evelyn's tissue crumpled, her voice breaking. "He's still critical, James. The doctors, they don't know if he'll wake up." James's throat tightened. Memories of Brian's mentorship, pulling him from a life of petty crime at 16 stinging. "He's tough, Evelyn. Ranger knew he was alive. We'll find who did this." Sophie's eyes flashed, her voice fierce. "Ranger's a hero, Uncle James. He wouldn't howl for nothing." Ranger's ears flicked, his nose nudging Sophie's hand, a flicker of trust beneath his guarded stare. A sedan crunched up the gravel drive, its headlights cutting the fog. Dr. Rachel Nguyen, 38, her black hair in a tight bun, her coroner's blouse swapped for a dark coat, stepped out, a medical file in hand. She'd confirmed the tetrodotoxin at the funeral home, her suspicions igniting the case. "Morning," she called, her eyes on Ranger, who tensed, a low growl rumbling. James stood, his voice calm. "Easy, boy." "She's with us." Rachel stopped short, her voice urgent. "Tetrodotoxin's rare, James. Military grade, not a street drug." Someone wanted Brian gone, clean. Evelyn's breath caught, her voice a sob. Who'd hate him that much? He was Port Haven's heart. Rachel opened the file, her voice steady. The puncture mark was precise. Inner arm, hidden. Multiple doses, likely over weeks. This was planned. James's pulse quickened, his voice sharp. "Weeks? Someone close, then." Evelyn's hand covered her mouth, her voice trembling. "He was working late, secretive." "The drug case." "He wouldn't tell me much." Sophie's voice cut in, her phone screen glowing. "I found something, Uncle James. Brian's old texts. Someone named Kingpin warned him to back off." Ranger's growl deepened, his body shifting toward the street, where a black SUV idled, its driver obscured. James's hand hovered near his holster, his voice cold. "That's been there since dawn." Rachel's eyes narrowed, her voice tense. "They're watching you, James." "That poison, it's not just about Brian, it's bigger." Evelyn's tears fell, her voice fierce. They tried to bury him alive. What kind of monster does that? Ranger's hackles rose, his nose sniffing the air, leading James to Brian's jacket, draped over a porch chair. The dog pawed at it, a faint whine escaping. James rifled the pocket, his fingers brushing a hidden microchip, military grade, buzzing faintly. "What the hell?" he muttered, his heart racing. Rachel's face paled, her voice low. "That's a tracker. Someone's been monitoring Brian." A screech of tires broke the silence. The SUV roared off, vanishing into the fog. Sophie's voice trembled, clutching Ranger. "Uncle James, they know we're on to them." James gripped the chip, his voice a growl. "They're scared. That means we're close." Evelyn's hand shook, her voice raw. "Close to what, James?" "Losing Brian again?" He looked at her, his eyes burning. "To justice, Evelyn. For him, for Port Haven." Ranger's whine was a vow, his eyes locked on James, ready to fight. The twist landed like a knife. Sophie's phone pinged, a new text from an unknown number. "Drop it, Carter, or you're next." James's blood ran cold, his voice fierce. "They're targeting us now." Rachel bagged the chip, her voice urgent. "We need to move, James." "Get to Brian's office. Find his files." Evelyn stood, her voice steel. "I'm coming. No one buries my husband twice." Sophie hugged Ranger, her voice defiant. "I'm helping too. Ranger's with us." The bungalow was no longer a refuge. It was a front line, and Ranger's instincts had ignited a war James couldn't back down from. The Oregon fog clung to Port Haven like a shroud, the Port Haven police station a gray fortress under a sky heavy with rain. James Carter sat in his cluttered office, his salt and pepper hair damp, his leather jacket creased, a half-empty coffee mug beside a flickering desk lamp. At 46, the detective's weathered face bore the strain of Chief Brian Walsh's poisoning, uncovered 2 days ago when Ranger's howls at the funeral home led to opening Brian's coffin. The black German shepherd lay by the door, his scarred muzzle tense, his brown eyes scanning the shadows, his healed ribs a testament to his survival of a warehouse blast. Brian, still critical in the ICU, was alive but comatose, poisoned by tetrodotoxin. Evelyn Walsh, 55, her auburn hair loose, her teacher's cardigan rumpled, clutched a photo of Brian, her hands trembling. Sophie Carter, 16, James's niece, her brown hair tucked under a hoodie, sat cross-legged, scrolling through Brian's old phone, her voice shaky. "Uncle James, these texts, they're scary." The microchip found in Brian's jacket and a threatening text, "Drop it, Carter, or you're next," had turned their quiet town into a battleground. "Read it again, Soph," James said, his voice low, raw, his gaze on Ranger, whose instincts had saved Brian. Sophie's screen glowed, her voice trembling. "It's from Kingpin, dated last week. Back off the case, Walsh, or you're done." Evelyn's photo slipped, her voice breaking. "He was so secretive, James. The drug case. He knew it was dangerous." James's throat tightened, memories of Brian pulling him from a life of crime at 16 burning in his chest. "He was onto something big, Evelyn. That poison wasn't random." Ranger's whine was soft, his nose nudging James's hand, his loyalty a lifeline after the SUV's ominous retreat. A knock shattered the silence. Ranger's growl erupted, his hackles up, his body coiled. James grabbed his service pistol, motioning Sophie to stay back, his voice a whisper. "Evelyn, behind me." Evelyn hesitated, her eyes on Ranger, then nodded, clutching Sophie. James cracked the door, revealing Dr. Rachel Nguyen, 38, her black hair damp, her coroner's coat creased, a toxicology report in hand. "It's me," she said, her voice urgent, glancing at Ranger, who softened but stayed alert. Tetrodotoxin was administered over weeks, James. Coffee, probably. Someone close. James's pulse spiked, his voice sharp. Weeks? At the station? Rachel nodded, her face grim. The break room machine's residue tested positive. Evelyn's sob choked, her voice raw. His coffee? He drank it every day. Sophie's phone pinged, her voice panicked. Another text, Uncle James. Same number. You're digging your grave, Carter. Ranger's growl deepened, his nose snapping toward the window where headlights flickered. A black SUV idling across the street. James's hand tightened on his pistol, his voice cold. They're here. Rachel's eyes widened, her voice fierce. We need Brian's files, James, now. But Ranger's bark turned frantic, his body lunging at the door as boots echoed in the hall. Too heavy, too deliberate. James shoved the desk aside, his voice urgent. Sophie, get to the evidence room. Lock it. Sophie grabbed Ranger's leash, her voice trembling. Come on, boy! Evelyn followed, her voice fierce. I'm not leaving you, James. He ignored her, his marine instincts kicking in, motioning Rachel to cover the rear. Go, I've got this. The door burst open, 3 men in dark gear storming in, one brandishing a silenced pistol. Carter, the leader snarled, his voice low. Hand over the chip. No one gets hurt. Ranger's snarl was thunderous, breaking free from Sophie, tackling the leader, his jaws disarming the pistol, pinning him to the floor. Sophie screamed, her voice raw. Ranger, no! James fired a warning shot, his voice a roar. Drop your weapons! The second man swung a baton, but Rachel cracked a chair over his arm, her voice fierce. Stay back! Evelyn grabbed a lamp, smashing the third man's knee, her voice desperate. You won't take Brian's truth. Ranger's growl shielded James, who zip-tied the leader, his bruised rib screaming. The SUV's engine roared outside, tires screeching as it fled. Sophie clung to Ranger, her voice sobbing. They're gonna kill us, Uncle James! James knelt beside her, his voice steady. Not while Ranger's here, Soph. Rachel's flashlight swept the leader's gear, her voice urgent. Military tech, comms, trackers. This isn't local. James rifled the man's pocket, finding a burner phone, its screen flashing a text. Kessler's orders, get the chip. James's blood froze, his voice trembling. Alan Kessler. The deputy chief? Evelyn's hand covered her mouth, her voice a sob. He was Brian's friend. How could he? Ranger's whine was sharp, his nose pawing the leader's vest, revealing a hidden vial, tetrodotoxin, labeled with a cartel crest. Rachel's face paled, her voice raw. They're supplying the poison. Kessler's in deep. The twist landed like a bomb. Sophie's phone buzzed again, a video loading. Brian, days before his death in his office, whispering, If I'm gone, James, check the safe. It's bigger than Kessler. James's heart stopped, his voice fierce. The safe at his house. We're going now. Evelyn's tears fell, her voice steel. I'm with you, James, for Brian. Rachel bagged the vial, her voice grim. This is a cartel hit, James. They'll kill to keep it quiet. Ranger's eyes met James's, fierce, ready, a vow to protect Sophie. The station was no longer safe. Kessler's betrayal had turned it into a trap, and Ranger's instincts were their only guide through a deepening conspiracy. The Oregon night was a cold, damp curtain, the Port Haven waterfront shrouded in fog as James Carter crouched behind a rusted shipping container, its peeling paint slick with mist. His salt and pepper hair clung to his forehead, his leather jacket torn from the frantic escape from the police station ambush hours ago where Ranger's ferocity had saved them from Deputy Chief Alan Kessler's men. His bruised rib throbbed, but his heart pounded with dread for Chief Brian Walsh, still comatose in the ICU, poisoned by tetrodotoxin, and for the microchip revealing Kessler's cartel ties. Ranger, the black German shepherd, pressed against him, his scarred muzzle low, his brown eyes piercing the fog, his bandaged flank a badge of his fight. Once Bravo, a military canine brutalized in a warehouse blast, Ranger's instincts had led them here, to Walsh's hidden safe in his seaside home. Evelyn Walsh, 55, her auburn hair loose, her teacher's cardigan soaked, knelt nearby, her breath sharp. Sophie Carter, 16, James's niece, her brown hair tucked under a hoodie, clutched Ranger's leash, her eyes wide. Agent Thomas Hayes, 50, his gray hair damp, his FBI jacket creased, scanned the dock with a flashlight, clutching a tip about Walsh's files. The waterfront, a cartel smuggling hub, loomed, its creaking piers a gateway to truth, or death. "Safes in the basement," Hayes whispered, his voice taut, pointing to Walsh's darkened house across the dock. "Guards, 4, armed. We get those files. We bury Kessler." James's hands shook, gripping a crowbar, his marine instincts warring with fear, but his voice was fierce. "For Brian, for Ranger, I'm in." Ranger's lunge at Kessler's man, exposing the tetrodotoxin vial, fueled his resolve. Sophie's voice trembled, stroking Ranger. "He'll find it, Uncle James. He always does." Evelyn's hand gripped James's arm, her voice raw. "Brian trusted you, James. Don't let them win." Hayes's flashlight caught a guard's shadow, radio buzzing. "They're moving crates. Drugs, maybe files," he said, his face grim. "We're out of time." Ranger's whine was urgent, his nose sniffing the air, leading them through the fog, his training sharp despite his trauma. James nodded, his throat tight, the station's threat. "You're digging your grave, Carter," ringing in his ears. "Let's move," he said, his voice low. The house's back door was ajar, revealing a musty interior, furniture draped in sheets, a faint hum of a generator. James slipped in, Hayes and Evelyn covering his flanks, Sophie and Ranger trailing, the air thick with mildew and menace. The basement stairs creaked, leading to a steel safe embedded in the wall. Ranger's bark was sharp, his body tensing at a hidden panel. James pried it open, his breath catching, a laptop, files, and a USB drive labeled Kingpin. "This is it," he gasped, grabbing the drive, but Ranger's growl turned feral, his nose pawing a crate marked evidence. Evelyn yanked it open, her voice trembling. Photos. Kessler with cartel bosses. Brian was building a case. Sophie's phone buzzed, her voice panicked. "Another text, Uncle James? You're too late, Carter." Ranger's hackles rose, his nose snapping toward the stairs. Boots echoed, heavy, deliberate. Headlights roared outside, 3 black SUVs screeching onto the dock. Kessler's men spilling out. 6, rifles raised, their leader shouting, "The files, Carter! Now!" James dove behind the safe, shielding Sophie, Ranger charging, tackling the leader, his jaws disarming a rifle, pinning him to the concrete. Hayes fired, grazing a second man, his shots precise, but the others advanced, bullets shattering crates. Evelyn's voice was a sob, clutching a file. "They'll kill us, James!" Sophie screamed, her voice raw. "Ranger, come back!" James tackled a third man, zip-tying him, his ribs screaming, his voice fierce. "Stay with me, Soph!" Ranger spun, shielding Evelyn, his bloodied flank heaving, but his eyes burned with defiance. The leader, bloodied, laughed, his voice cold. "Kessler's done with you, Carter. Kingpin wants those files burned." James's rage erupted, his voice a roar. "You're not touching them!" He swung his crowbar, cracking a guard's arm. Ranger's snarl protecting Sophie, who clung to a crate, whimpering. Hayes's radio crackled. Dr. Rachel and Gwen at the hospital, her voice urgent.
James, Brian's crashing. Another dose. Someone's in the ICU.
James's heart stopped, his voice trembling.
They're hitting him again.
The twist landed like a sledgehammer. Evelyn's hand shook, pulling a hidden recorder from the safe, Brian's voice crackling. If you're hearing this, James, Kessler's not alone. Spector's a councilman. Mark Thornton. He's funding the cartel. James's blood froze, his voice raw. Thornton. The reform guy? Ranger's bark spiked, his nose at a guard's vest, revealing a burner phone flashing. Thornton's orders, eliminate Walsh, Carter. Sophie's sob choked, her voice fierce. They're everywhere, Uncle James. Hayes tackled a fourth man, his voice grim. We're pinned. More guards flooded in, 8 tasers and knives surrounding them. Ranger lunged, disarming a taser, protecting Evelyn, while James's shots bought seconds, grazing a guard. Sophie's voice was desperate, clutching Ranger's leash. Don't let them win. The leader aimed at Ranger, his voice cold. Your mutts first. James threw a crate lid, knocking the rifle free, his rage a Marine's fire. You'll never touch him. Ranger pinned another guard, his jaws fierce but controlled. Hayes tackled a sixth, but the radio buzzed again. Rachel, her voice panicked. James, it's Linda Walsh, Evelyn's sister. She's in the ICU with a syringe. Evelyn's scream was primal, her voice breaking. Linda? My sister. She'd never. But James's mind raced. Linda, always at the hospital, trusted by Evelyn. Sirens wailed, FBI cruisers storming the dock, floodlights cutting the fog. Hayes cuffed the leader, his voice grim. We've got them. James clung to Ranger and Sophie, Evelyn's tears falling, her voice fierce. Find her, James. Save Brian. Hayes grabbed the USB, his face set. This name's Thornton's cartel drops. We're close. But James's voice was raw. Linda's the key. If she's Spector's mole. Ranger's eyes met his, fierce, ready, a vow to protect. The waterfront was secure, but Thornton's shadow loomed, Brian's life hanging by a thread, and Ranger's instincts were their only hope. The Oregon rain lashed Port Haven, the waterfront warehouse district a labyrinth of rusted cranes and sagging roofs under a storm-charged sky. James Carter gripped a flashlight, his salt and pepper hair soaked, his leather jacket bloodied from the dockside raid where Ranger had saved them from Deputy Chief Alan Kessler's cartel enforcers. His bruised ribs screamed, but his heart raced with fear for Chief Brian Walsh, poisoned again in the ICU, and for the USB drive exposing Councilman Mark Thornton as Spector, the cartel's financier. Ranger, the black German shepherd, moved silently beside him, his scarred muzzle low, his brown eyes cutting through the fog, his bandaged flank a testament to his fight. Once Bravo, a canine brutalized in a warehouse blast, Ranger's instincts had led them here, chasing Kessler's cartel contacts. Evelyn Walsh, 55, her auburn hair damp, her teacher's cardigan torn, clutched a stolen file, her breath sharp. Sophie Carter, 16, James's niece, her brown hair under a hoodie, held Ranger's leash, her eyes wide. Agent Thomas Hayes, 50, his gray hair mussed, his FBI jacket soaked, carried a burner phone, evidence of Thornton's deals. The warehouse, a cartel drop point, loomed, its steel doors a gateway to answers or a trap. Loading bay, now, Hayes whispered, his voice taut, pointing to a flickering light inside. Guards, 5 armed. We get Thornton's ledger, we end this. James's hands shook, his flashlight beam unsteady, his marine instincts battling dread, but his voice was fierce. Ranger's not dying for Thornton's lies. We're in. Rangers lunge at Kessler's man, exposing the tetrodotoxin vial, fueled his resolve. Brian's recorded warning. It's bigger than Kessler. Echoing. Sophie's voice trembled, stroking Ranger. He'll find it, Uncle James. He's our hero. Evelyn's hand gripped James's, her voice raw. Brian's fighting, James. Don't let them bury him again. Hayes's flashlight caught a guard's silhouette, radio buzzing. They're packing crates, drugs, files, he said, his face grim. We hit fast. Ranger's growl was low, his hackles up, leading them through the rain, his nose sniffing for threats. James nodded, his throat tight. The ICU's crisis, Linda Walsh, Evelyn's sister, caught with a syringe, burning in his mind. Let's move, he said, his voice low. The bay door was ajar, revealing a cavernous interior, pallets, shredded papers, and a faint whimper from a locked bay. Ranger's bark was sharp, his body tensing at a steel door marked storage. James pried it open, the sight gut-wrenching. 3 German shepherds, emaciated, caged, their canine tags glinting. They're alive, he gasped, rushing forward, Ranger guarding him, his whine desperate. A female, scarred, whimpered, her eyes pleading. We're here, James said, cutting the locks, tears burning. Hayes's pistol covered the door, his voice fierce. Move, pups, we're out. Evelyn grabbed a crate's lid, revealing burner phones, cash, and a ledger. This lists Thornton's payments, cartel, judges, she said, bagging a phone, but Ranger's growl turned rabid, his nose pawing a hidden crate. James yanked it open, his breath catching. A laptop streaming live, not just the dogs, but Brian in the ICU, monitors flatlining, Linda's shadow fleeing. They're killing him, James screamed, his voice breaking, clutching the female shepherd. Sophie's sob choked, her voice fierce. Uncle James, we have to save him. Headlights roared outside, 4 black SUVs screeching into the lot, Kessler's men spilling out. 7 rifles and tasers, their leader shouting, The ledger! Carter, now! James dove behind a pallet, shielding Sophie, Ranger charging, tackling the leader, his jaws disarming a rifle, pinning him to the concrete. Hayes fired, grazing a second man, his shots precise despite a bleeding arm, but the others advanced, bullets shredding crates. Evelyn's voice was desperate, clutching the ledger. They'll burn it all, James, Sophie screamed, her voice raw. Ranger, come back! James tackled a third man, zip-tying him, his ribs searing, his voice fierce. Stay with me, Soph! Ranger spun, shielding Evelyn, his bloodied flank heaving, his eyes fierce. The leader, bloodied, laughed, his voice cold. Thornton's done with you, Carter. Kingpin wants you buried. James's rage erupted, his voice a roar. You're not touching them. He swung his crowbar, cracking a guard's wrist, Ranger's snarl protecting Sophie, who clung to the female shepherd, whimpering. Hayes's radio crackled. Dr. Rachel Nguyen at the hospital, her voice urgent. James, Brian stabilized, but Linda's talking. She says Thornton's got a mole in the FBI. James's heart stopped, his voice trembling. A mole? Who? The twist landed like a bomb. Hayes's burner phone buzzed, a text flashing. Kingpin's orders, eliminate Carter, take Ledger. James's blood froze, his voice raw. Thomas, you're the mole? Hayes's face hardened, his pistol snapping up, aimed at James. You're too close, Carter. Thornton pays better than the Bureau. Evelyn's scream was primal, her voice breaking. You betrayed Brian? After everything? Ranger's bark spiked, his body leaping at Hayes, distracting him, the shot grazing James's arm, blood spraying. Sophie's voice was desperate, clutching Ranger's leash. Uncle James, no! James dove, tackling Hayes, his fist swinging, a Marine's fury unleashed. You'll never touch them! Sophie's courage. Ranger's our hero fueled him, the crowbar cracking Hayes's wrist, the gun clattering. Evelyn cuffed Hayes with a zip tie, her voice fierce. "You're done, traitor." But Hayes's laugh was chilling, his eyes wild. "Kingpin's untouchable, Carter." "You've won nothing." Ranger's growl intensified, his nose at Hayes's coat, pawing a hidden microchip, buzzing with a feed, dozens of caged dogs in a Mexican port. "They're trafficking them," Evelyn gasped, her voice raw. More guards flooded in, 9, armed, closing the circle. Ranger lunged, disarming a taser, protecting Sophie, while James's shots bought seconds, grazing a guard. Evelyn's voice was a sob. "James, save Brian." The female shepherd pressed against Sophie, her trust mirroring Ranger's. Sirens wailed, FBI cruisers storming the lot, floodlights cutting the rain. Evelyn secured Hayes, her face set, blood seeping from a cut. "We've got him, but Kingpin's free." James grabbed the ledger, his voice fierce. "This name's Thornton's network. We're close." But his tears fell, his voice raw. "Brian's still fighting, Evelyn." "We're not done." Ranger's eyes met his, fierce, ready, a vow to protect. The warehouse was secure, the dogs safe, but Kingpin's shadow loomed, Brian's life on the line, and Ranger's instincts were their only guide. The Oregon storm raged over Port Haven, the police station's basement, a bunker of flickering fluorescent lights and damp concrete. James Carter leaned against a file cabinet, his salt and pepper hair matted with sweat, his leather jacket torn from the warehouse raid where Ranger had exposed Agent Thomas Hayes as a cartel mole. His bruised rib burned, but his heart pounded with dread for Chief Brian Walsh, clinging to life in the ICU after a second tetrodotoxin dose. Ranger, the black German shepherd, lay alert by the door, his scarred muzzle tense, his brown eyes scanning the shadows, his bandaged flank a testament to his fight. Once Bravo, a K-9 brutalized in a warehouse blast, Ranger's instincts had saved 3 caged shepherds and uncovered Councilman Mark Thornton's ledger. Evelyn Walsh, 55, her auburn hair loose, her teacher's cardigan bloodied, clutched the stolen USB drive, her breath shaky. Sophie Carter, 16, James's niece, her brown hair under a hoodie, sat cross-legged, decoding the ledger on a laptop, her voice trembling. "Uncle James, this is huge." The revelation of Linda Walsh, Evelyn's sister, as Thornton's accomplice, and a new threat. Kingpin's orders, eliminate Carter, had turned their station into a war zone. "Thornton's paying off judges, cops," Sophie said, her screen glowing, her voice fierce. "There's a drop tonight, Uncle James." James's gaze stayed on Ranger, his voice raw. "We stop it, Soph. For Brian." Evelyn's hand shook, her voice breaking. "Linda, how could she do this to him?" James's throat tightened, memories of Brian's mentorship, saving him from juvie at 16, stinging. "She's scared, Evelyn. Thornton's got her trapped." Ranger's whine was soft, his nose nudging James's hand, his loyalty a lifeline after Hayes's betrayal. A thud echoed from the stairwell. Ranger's growl erupted, his hackles up, his body coiled. James grabbed his service pistol, motioning Sophie to the corner, his voice a whisper. "Evelyn, behind the shelves." Evelyn hesitated, her eyes on Ranger, then nodded, clutching the USB. Sophie dragged Ranger, her voice panicked. "Stay, boy!" James cracked the door, revealing Dr. Rachel Nguyen, 38, her black hair damp, her coroner's coat creased, a toxicology report in hand. "It's me," she said, her voice urgent, glancing at Ranger, who softened but stayed alert. "Linda's talking, James. She named Thornton's drop. Pier 7,
Midnight.
James's pulse spiked, his voice sharp. Tonight, we're there. Rachel's report trembled in her hand, her voice grim. Tetrodotoxins in the station's water cooler, James.
Someone's dosing the whole department.
Evelyn sobbed, choked, her voice raw.
They're poisoning everyone? For what?
Sophie's laptop pinged, her voice desperate. Another email, Uncle James, from Kingpin. Clear the station, Thornton. No witnesses. Ranger's growl deepened, his nose snapping toward the vent where a faint hiss sounded, gas seeping in. James's blood ran cold, his voice fierce. They're gassing us! Move! The basement door splintered, 5 men in tactical gear storming in, gas masks on, rifles raised, their leader shouting, "The USB, Carter, now!" Ranger charged, a black blur, tackling the leader, his jaws disarming a rifle, pinning him to the concrete. James fired, grazing a second man, his shot steady despite his ribs' scream, but the gas thickened, stinging his eyes. Evelyn swung a fire extinguisher, cracking a guard's mask, her voice fierce. "You won't touch Brian's evidence." Sophie coughed, her voice raw. "Ranger, help!" James tackled a third man, zip-tying him, his lungs burning, his voice desperate. "Soph, get to the vent!" Ranger spun, shielding Sophie, his bloodied flank heaving, his eyes fierce. The leader, mask cracked, laughed, his voice muffled. "Thornton's cleaning house, Carter. Kingpin wants you all dead." James's rage erupted, his voice a roar. "Not today!" He smashed a chair over a guard's head, Ranger's snarl protecting Evelyn, who coughed, clutching the USB. Rachel's radio crackled. Officer Emily Chen at the hospital, her voice urgent. "James, Linda's gone. She escaped custody, headed your way." James's heart stopped, his voice trembling. "Linda? She's coming here?" The twist landed like a thunderbolt. The vent hissed louder, and Linda Walsh, 53, auburn-haired, disheveled, her nurse's scrubs stained, burst through a side door, syringe in hand, her face wild. "Evelyn, give me the drive!" she screamed, lunging at her sister. Evelyn's voice broke, tears streaming. "Linda, you poisoned Brian? Your own brother-in-law?" Ranger's bark spiked, his body leaping at Linda, pinning her arm, the syringe clattering. Sophie's sob choked, her voice fierce. "You betrayed us, Aunt Linda." James tackled a fourth guard, his vision blurring, his voice raw. "Why, Linda?" "Why him?" Linda's eyes darted, her voice desperate. "Thornton threatened my son, James. I had no choice." Rachel cuffed her, her voice grim. "You dosed the cooler, didn't you?" Linda's shoulders slumped, her voice a sob. "Just enough to sicken them. To buy time." Ranger's growl intensified, his nose at Linda's scrubs, pawing a hidden burner phone flashing. "Kingpin's orders. Gas the station. Take USB." James's blood froze, his voice fierce. "Who's Kingpin, Linda?" "Give me a name!" Linda's eyes widened, her voice a whisper. "Mayor Richard Holt. He's untouchable." More guards flooded in, 7, armed, gas masks glowing in the haze. Ranger lunged, disarming a taser, protecting Sophie, while James's shots bought seconds, grazing a guard. Evelyn's voice was a sob, clutching the USB. "James, save Brian!" The female shepherd from the warehouse, now freed, pressed against Sophie, her trust mirroring Ranger's. Sirens wailed, FBI cruisers storming the lot, floodlights cutting the rain. Rachel secured Linda, her face set, blood seeping from a cut. "We've got her, but Holt's free." James grabbed the laptop, his voice fierce. "This name's Holt's cartel network." "We're close." But his tears fell, his voice raw. "Brian's still in danger, Evelyn. We're not done." Ranger's eyes met his, fierce, ready, a vow to protect. The basement was secure, but Holt's shadow loomed, Brian's life on the line, and Ranger's instincts were their only guide. The Oregon night was a relentless downpour, the Port Haven Marina, a maze of swaying boats and rain-slicked docks under a sky bruised with thunder. James Carter crouched behind a stack of lobster traps, his salt and pepper hair plastered to his forehead, his leather jacket bloodied from the station basement ambush where Ranger had thwarted Linda Walsh's gas attack. His bruised ribs screamed, his grazed arm throbbed, but his heart pounded with dread for Chief Brian Walsh, still comatose in the ICU, poisoned by tetrodotoxin, orchestrated by Mayor Richard Holt, codenamed Kingpin. Ranger, the black German shepherd, pressed against him, his scarred muzzle low, his brown eyes slicing through the fog, his bandaged flank a testament to his fight. Once Bravo, a canine brutalized in a warehouse blast, Ranger's instincts had exposed Councilman Mark Thornton and Deputy Chief Alan Kessler's cartel ties. Evelyn Walsh, 55, her auburn hair soaked, her teacher's cardigan torn, clutched the stolen USB drive, her breath sharp. Sophie Carter, 16, James's niece, her brown hair under a hoodie, held Ranger's leash, her eyes wide with fear. Dr. Rachel Nguyen, 38, her black hair loose, her coroner's coat swapped for a dark jacket, gripped a burner phone, evidence of Holt's network. The marina, Holt's smuggling hub, loomed, its creaking piers a battleground for truth. Pier 7, now, Rachel whispered, her voice taut, pointing to a yacht's flickering lights. Guards, 6, armed. We get Holt's shipment records, we nail him. James's hands trembled, clutching a crowbar, his marine instincts afire despite the pain, his voice fierce. Ranger's not dying for Holt's empire. We end this. Ranger's lunge at Linda, stopping her syringe, fueled his resolve. Brian's recorded warning. It's bigger than Kessler, burning in his mind. Sophie's voice shook, stroking Ranger. He'll find it, Uncle James. He's our hero. Evelyn's hand gripped James's, her voice raw. Brian's fighting, James. Don't let them bury him again. Rachel's flashlight caught a guard's shadow, radio buzzing. They're loading crates, drugs, records, she said, her face grim. We hit hard. Ranger's growl was low, his hackles up, leading them through the rain, his nose sniffing for threats. James nodded, his throat tight. Linda's confession. Holt's untouchable, echoing. Let's move, he said, his voice low. The yacht's gangway was slick, its deck shadowed by tarps and crates. James slipped aboard, Rachel and Evelyn covering his flanks, Sophie and Ranger trailing. The air thick with diesel and danger. Ranger's bark was sharp, his body tensing at a locked hatch. James jimmied it open, revealing a hold stacked with crates, narcotics, cash, and a ledger marked Kingpin. This is it, he gasped, grabbing the ledger, but Ranger's growl turned feral, his nose pawing a hidden crate. Evelyn yanked it open, her voice trembling. Photos, Holt with cartel bosses, Thornton, Kessler. Brian was so close. Sophie's phone buzzed, her voice panicked. Another text, Uncle James. You're dead, Carter. It's from Kingpin. Ranger's hackles rose, his nose snapping toward the deck. Boots echoed, heavy, deliberate. Headlights roared, 5 black SUVs screeching onto the pier, Holt's men spilling out, 8 rifles and tasers, their leader shouting, "The ledger, Carter, now!" James dove behind a crate, shielding Sophie, Ranger charging, tackling the leader, his jaws disarming a rifle, pinning him to the deck. Rachel fired, grazing a second man, her shots precise despite a bleeding cut, but the others advanced, bullets splintering crates. Evelyn's voice was a sob, clutching the USB. "They'll kill us, James!" Sophie screamed, her voice raw. "Ranger,
Come back!
James tackled a third man, zip-tying him, his ribs searing, his voice fierce. "Stay with me, Soph." Ranger spun, shielding Evelyn, his bloodied flank heaving, his eyes fierce. The leader, bloodied, laughed, his voice cold. "Holt's cleaning Port Haven, Carter. Kingpin wants you erased." James's rage erupted, his voice a roar.
Not tonight!
He swung his crowbar, cracking a guard's wrist. Ranger's snarl protecting Sophie, who clung to a crate, whimpering. Rachel's radio crackled. Officer Emily Chen at the station, her voice urgent. "James, Linda's talking more."
She says Holt's got a partner, a judge, Elizabeth Crane. James's heart stopped, his voice trembling. Crane! She dismissed our drug cases. The twist landed like a thunderbolt. A figure emerged from the yacht's cabin, a woman, 60, silver-haired, in a tailored coat, pistol aimed at James. "You're persistent, Carter," she sneered, her voice venomous. Judge Elizabeth Crane, Holt's partner, codenamed Viper. Brian was a liability, and your meddling ends now. Evelyn's scream was primal, her voice breaking. "You poisoned my husband." "For money?" Ranger's snarl was ferocious, his body leaping at Crane, distracting her, the shot grazing Rachel's leg, blood spraying. Sophie's voice was desperate, clutching Ranger's leash. "Uncle James, no!" James dove, tackling Crane, his fists swinging, a Marine's fury unleashed. "You'll never touch them!" Sophie's courage. Ranger's our hero fueled him, the crowbar cracking Crane's wrist, the gun clattering. Rachel cuffed her, her voice grim despite her limp. "You're done, Judge." But Crane's laugh was chilling, her eyes wild. "Holt's untouchable, Carter. Kingpin's empire's bigger than you know." Ranger's growl spiked, his nose at Crane's coat, pawing a hidden microchip, buzzing with a feed. Hundreds of caged dogs in a Colombian port. "They're trafficking them globally," Rachel gasped, her voice raw. "Holt's funding it all." More guards flooded in, 10, armed, gas masks glowing in the rain. Ranger lunged, disarming a taser, protecting Sophie while James's shots bought seconds, grazing a guard. Evelyn's voice was a sob, clutching the ledger. "James, save Brian!" The female shepherd from the warehouse, now freed, pressed against Sophie, her trust mirroring Ranger's. The leader aimed at Ranger, his voice cold. "Your mutts first." James threw a crate lid, knocking the rifle free, his rage a Marine's fire. "You'll never touch him!" Ranger pinned another guard, his jaws fierce but controlled. Rachel tackled a sixth, but the radio buzzed again. Chen, her voice panicked. "James, Holt's at the hospital. He's after Brian." Evelyn's scream was heart-wrenching, her voice fierce. "He's going to finish him!" James's vision blurred, his voice raw. "We're trapped!" Sirens wailed, FBI cruisers storming the marina, floodlights cutting the storm. Rachel secured Crane, her face set, blood seeping from her leg. "We've got her, but Holt's loose." James grabbed the microchip, his voice fierce. "This name's Holt's Global Drops. We're close." But his tears fell, his voice raw. "Brian's in danger, Evelyn. We've got to move." Ranger's eyes met his, fierce, ready, a vow to protect. The yacht was secure, the dogs safe, but Holt's shadow loomed, Brian's life on the line, and Ranger's instincts were their only guide. The Oregon dawn broke raw and unforgiving, the Port Haven Hospital's ICU, a fortress of beeping monitors and sterile white walls under a sky heavy with clouds. James Carter stood in the dimly lit corridor, his salt and pepper hair disheveled, his leather jacket bloodied from the marina raid where Ranger had unmasked Judge Elizabeth Crane as Viper, a key player in Mayor Richard Holt's cartel empire. His bruised rib burned, his grazed arm throbbed, but his heart raced with fear for Chief Brian Walsh, teetering on the edge of life after multiple tetrodotoxin doses. Ranger, the black German shepherd, pressed against him, his scarred muzzle low, his brown eyes vigilant, his bandaged flank a badge of his relentless fight. Once, Bravo, a K-9 brutalized in a warehouse blast. Ranger's instincts had saved caged dogs and exposed Holt's global trafficking network. Evelyn Walsh, 55, her auburn hair loose, her teacher's cardigan stained, clutched Brian's medical chart, her breath shaky. Sophie Carter, 16, James's niece, her brown hair under a hoodie, held Ranger's leash, her eyes red from tears. Dr. Rachel Nguyen, 38, her black hair tied back, her coroner's coat swapped for scrubs, checked a toxicology report, her face grim. The hospital, now a battleground, hummed with tension. Holt, codenamed Kingpin, was coming for Brian. Security's tripled, Rachel whispered, her voice taut, nodding to armed guards at the ICU door. Holt's men hit the hospital last night, tried to cut the power. James's hands trembled, gripping his service pistol, his marine instincts ablaze despite the pain, his voice fierce. Ranger stopped Crane, he'll stop Holt. Ranger's lunge at Crane, exposing her microchip, fueled his resolve. Brian's warning, check the safe, echoing. Sophie's voice shook, stroking Ranger. He's our hero, Uncle James. Brian's got to make it. Evelyn's hand gripped James's, her voice raw. Holt was Brian's friend, James. How could he betray him like this? Rachel's report trembled, her voice urgent. Tetrodotoxins still in Brian's system. Trace doses, likely from IV tampering. Someone inside's helping Holt. James's pulse spiked, his voice sharp. Inside, who's left? Sophie's phone buzzed, her voice panicked. Another text, Uncle James. Kingpin says end Walsh tonight. Ranger's growl deepened, his nose snapping toward the hallway where footsteps echoed, too deliberate, too heavy. James's blood ran cold, his voice fierce. They're here. Move! The ICU door swung open. 4 men in tactical gear storming in, silenced pistols raised, their leader shouting, The chief's done, Carter! Ranger charged, a black blur, tackling the leader, his jaws disarming a pistol, pinning him to the floor. James fired, grazing a second man, his shots precise despite his ribs' scream, but the others advanced, bullets shattering monitors. Evelyn swung a tray, cracking a guard's arm, her voice fierce. You won't touch my husband, Sophie screamed, her voice raw. Ranger, help! James tackled a third man, zip-tying him, his arm bleeding, his voice desperate. Soph, get to the stairwell. Ranger spun, shielding Evelyn, his bloodied flank heaving, his eyes fierce. The leader, bloodied, laughed, his voice cold. Holt's cleaning Port Haven, Carter. Kingpin wants Walsh silenced. James's rage erupted, his voice a roar. Not on my watch. He smashed a chair over a guard's head, Ranger's snarl protecting Sophie, who clung to the female shepherd from the warehouse, whimpering. Rachel's radio crackled. Officer Emily Chen at the station, her voice urgent. James, Holt's hacked the hospital cameras. He's watching you. James's heart stopped, his voice trembling. He's orchestrating this from inside? The twist landed like a sledgehammer. A figure stepped from the shadows. A man, 62, silver-haired, in a tailored suit, pistol aimed at James. You're tenacious, Carter, he sneered, his voice smooth. Mayor Richard Holt, Kingpin himself. Brian was too noble for his own good. You're next. Evelyn's scream was heart-wrenching, her voice breaking. You poisoned him, Richard? Our friend for 30 years? Ranger's snarl was primal, his body leaping at Holt, distracting him, the shot grazing Evelyn's shoulder, blood spraying. Sophie's voice was desperate, clutching Ranger's leash. "Uncle James, no!" James dove, tackling Holt, his fists swinging, a Marine's fury unleashed. "You'll never touch them!" Sophie's courage, Ranger's our hero, fueled him, his pistol cracking Holt's wrist, the gun clattering. Rachel cuffed him, her voice grim despite her limp. "You're done, Mayor." But Holt's laugh was chilling, his eyes wild. "My partner's untouchable, Carter. You've won nothing." Ranger's growl spiked, his nose at Holt's coat, pawing a hidden burner phone, flashing a feed, thousands of caged dogs in a Brazilian port. "Global trafficking," Rachel gasped, her voice raw. "Holt's just the face." More guards flooded in, 12 armed, gas masks glowing in the dim light. Ranger lunged, disarming a taser, protecting Sophie, while James's shots bought seconds, grazing a guard. Evelyn's voice was a sob, clutching Brian's chart. "James, save him." The female shepherd pressed against Sophie, her trust mirroring Ranger's. The leader aimed at Ranger, his voice cold. "Your mutts first." James threw a monitor, knocking the rifle free, his rage a Marine's fire. "You'll never touch him!" Ranger pinned another guard, his jaws fierce but controlled. Rachel tackled a sixth, but the radio buzzed again. Chen, her voice panicked. "James, it's Kessler!" "He's alive, leading Holt's men from the roof." James's blood froze, his voice raw. "Kessler? We cuffed him!" The deputy chief's survival was a gut punch, his arrest a ruse to lure them here. Sophie's sob choked, her voice fierce. "They tricked us, Uncle James." Evelyn's hand shook, her voice steel. Brian trusted Kessler. "He's a monster." Rachel's flashlight swept Holt's gear, revealing a microchip with a new feed. Brian's ICU room, a nurse slipping a syringe into his IV. "Another dose!" Rachel screamed, her voice breaking. "They're killing him now!" James's pistol snapped up, his voice fierce. "We're pinned!" More guards poured in, 15, armed, closing the circle. Ranger lunged, disarming a knife, protecting Evelyn, while James's shots bought seconds, grazing a guard. Sophie's voice was desperate, clutching Ranger's leash. "Don't let them win." Holt's eyes gleamed, his voice cold. "You're too late, Carter. Brian's gone." James's scream was primal, Ranger's loyalty his anchor. Sirens roared, FBI cruisers storming the hospital, floodlights cutting the rain. Rachel secured Holt, her face set, blood seeping from her leg. "We've got him, but Kessler's loose." James grabbed the burner phone, his voice fierce. "This name's Holt's global network. We're close." But his tears fell, his voice raw. "Brian's slipping, Evelyn. We've got to get to him." Ranger's eyes met his, fierce, ready, a vow to protect. The ICU was secure, but Kessler's shadow loomed, Brian's life fading, and Ranger's instincts were their only hope. The Oregon sun spilled golden light over Port Haven's town square, where locals, officers, and news crews gathered for a ceremony celebrating a triumph over corruption. James Carter stood on a modest stage, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, a clean denim jacket replacing the bloodied leather one from the hospital raid where Ranger had unmasked Mayor Richard Holt as Kingpin. Beside him, Sophie Carter, 16, his niece, clutched a stuffed dog, her brown hair loose, her hoodie swapped for a blue sweater, her sneakers scuffed from nights of danger. Ranger, the black German shepherd, sat proudly at Sophie's side, his scarred muzzle calm, his brown eyes vigilant, his healed flank a badge of his relentless courage. Once Bravo, a K-9 brutalized in a warehouse blast, Ranger's Howls had saved Chief Brian Walsh from a poisoned coffin, exposing a global trafficking network. Evelyn Walsh, 55, her auburn hair tied back, her teacher's cardigan crisp, stood nearby, her smile warm but her eyes shadowed by Brian's fragile recovery. Dr. Rachel Nguyen, 38, her black hair free, her coroner scrubs pristine, reviewed case files, her resolve unshaken. The square buzzed with hope, but Holt's warning, "My partner's untouchable," and Deputy Chief Alan Kessler's escape cast a lingering shadow. James gripped the podium, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Ranger didn't just save Brian, he saved Port Haven," he said, eyes sweeping the crowd, Sophie's hand in his. His courage cut through lies, and Sophie's heart showed us what trust means. This is your story, too, about fighting for justice no matter the cost. The crowd cheered, cameras flashing, a banner overhead reading Ranger's redemption. James's throat tightened, his grief for his late wife Emily and Brian's mentorship pulling him from juvenile crime at 16, now a badge of honor. Sophie's voice, "Ranger's our hero," burned bright. Ranger's whine was soft, his nose nudging Sophie, who giggled, her fear fading. Sophie took the mic, her small voice clear. "Ranger's my best friend. He stopped the bad guys and loves us." The German shepherd licked her hand, the crowd awing, many wiping tears. James knelt, hugging her, his voice cracking. "You're my hero, Sophie. You and Ranger gave me a reason to keep fighting." Sophie hugged Ranger, whispering, "You're the best dog ever." The air thrummed with unity, Port Haven reborn through a girl and her protector. Evelyn joined, holding a plaque, her voice warm but trembling. "Ranger's a canine legend and Sophie's his spark." We're launching Ranger's Haven, a fund to rehab canines and officers because of them. She handed Sophie the plaque, the crowd roaring, kids waving signs. "Ranger saves." James's chest swelled, but doubt gnawed. "Evelyn, we got Holt, but Kessler's out there. Is Brian safe?" Ranger's tail flicked, his eyes alert, sensing his unease. Evelyn's smile was fierce. "We're close, James. Ranger started this, and we'll finish it." Rachel approached, her files heavy, her voice steady. "Feds are raiding ports. Colombia, Brazil. Holt's partner, codenamed Wraith, is a state senator tied to the cartel. We've got leads." She nodded at Ranger, awe shining. "This dog's why those canines are home. He's a miracle." The crowd applauded, but James's gaze drifted to Sophie, his heart heavy. The burner phone's feed of caged dogs. Wraith's shadow. Brian still a target. A familiar figure stepped forward. Ethan, 10, a shy boy whose dad served with James, holding a toy bone. "Ranger saved my dad's dog," he said, voice soft, tossing the bone. Ranger caught it, bounding back, the crowd laughing, Ethan's smile a beacon. Sophie hugged him, her voice bright. "Ranger saves everybody." James's tears fell, his voice a whisper. "You're changing lives, Soph." Evelyn's hand squeezed his, her voice fierce. "You both are, James." The ceremony buzzed, kids petting Ranger, locals sharing stories, the fund soaring. Rachel pulled James aside, her voice low. "We found a name. Senator Laura Bennett. Wraith. She's in Port Haven, planning a final shipment." James's heart sank, the twist chilling. Bennett had attended Brian's funeral, offering condolences. "She was there," he whispered, his voice trembling. "She watched us grieve." Rachel's radio crackled, a Fed's update. Bennett's signal pinged at the marina, planning a drop. "We're moving." Ranger's growl was faint, his nose twitching toward the crowd's edge. A man in a dark coat slipping away, unnoticed by most. James's blood ran cold, his voice a whisper. "He's one of hers, isn't he?"
Sophie clung to Ranger, her small voice fierce. Ranger'll find him, Uncle James, like he found Holt. The twist deepened. A volunteer, Karen Wells, a local nurse, approached, offering Sophie a cookie, her smile too sharp. Ranger's bark erupted, sharp, his body lunging at Wells, pinning her to the ground, snarling but controlled. James's scream pierced the air, his voice fierce. "Get away from her!" Rachel tackled Wells, her pistol drawn, finding a hidden burner phone in her purse, buzzing with a text. Wraith's orders, "Take Carter girl." The crowd gasped, parents shielding kids, cameras rolling. Evelyn cuffed Wells, her face grim. "She's a mole, feeding Bennett intel. We're closer." Sophie's tears fell, her voice a sob. "Why me, Uncle James?" James hugged her, his voice breaking. "Because you're our light, Soph, and Ranger's our strength. They can't win." Ranger's whine was a vow, his eyes locked on Wells, his instincts unerring. Rachel's voice was fierce despite her bandaged leg. "We've got Bennett's trail, James. Wells' phone has her location, a marina warehouse tonight." Evelyn's eyes blazed, her voice steady. "We end this, James, for Brian." The celebration paused, officers forming a perimeter. The crowd hushed. James's phone buzzed, a video from Chen showing Brian awake, whispering, "James, get Bennett. She's the key." James's heart leapt, his voice raw. "He's awake, Evelyn. Brian's fighting." Evelyn's tears fell, her voice fierce. "Then we fight, too." "For him." Sophie hugged Ranger, her small voice defiant. "You'll save more dogs, won't you, Ranger?" The German shepherd's eyes met hers, fierce, ready, a promise to protect. The twist landed harder. Wells' phone buzzed again, a final text. "Bennett's not alone." Wraith's networks global. James's heart raced, the USB heavy in Evelyn's hands. Sophie was safe, the dogs freed, but Wraith's shadow loomed, a vast empire. James's fight, for Ranger, for justice, was a race against time, and Ranger's instincts were their only weapon. The warehouse awaited, Bennett's escape imminent, and James knew this battle would decide Brian's fate. The Oregon sunset bathed Port Haven in hues of amber and crimson, the town hall aglow with warmth as locals, officers, and news crews gathered to celebrate a hard-won victory over a sinister cartel network. James Carter stood at a podium, his salt-and-pepper hair neat, a clean flannel shirt replacing the bloodied leather jacket from the Marina warehouse raid where Ranger had exposed Senator Laura Bennett as Wraith, the mastermind behind Chief Brian Walsh's poisoning. Beside him, Sophie Carter, 16, his niece, beamed, her brown hair tied with ribbons, her blue sweater bright, her sneakers scuffed, clutching a stuffed dog. Ranger, the black German shepherd, sat tall, his scarred muzzle proud, his brown eyes soft yet vigilant, his healed flank a symbol of his courage. Once Bravo, a canine brutalized in a warehouse blast, Ranger's Howls had saved Brian from a poisoned coffin, dismantling a global trafficking ring. Evelyn Walsh, 55, her auburn hair loose, her teacher's cardigan crisp, smiled from the sidelines, pride in her eyes as Brian, still frail, sat in a wheelchair nearby, awake after weeks in the ICU. Dr. Rachel Nguyen, 38, her black hair free, her coroner's scrubs pristine, stood close, her resolve unshaken. The ceremony pulsed with hope, but Bennett's final text, Wraith's Networks Global, hinted at a shadow still lurking. James gripped the podium, his voice clear, trembling with emotion. Ranger didn't just save Brian. He saved our souls, he said, eyes sweeping the crowd, Sophie's hand in his.
His heart broke through betrayal, and Sophie's courage showed us what loyalty means. This is your story, too, about trusting the bonds that heal us. The crowd roared, cameras flashing, a banner overhead reading Ranger's Haven. James's throat tightened, his grief for his late wife, Emily, and Brian's mentorship, pulling him from crime at 16, now a badge of honor. Sophie's voice, Ranger's our hero, was a beacon of light. Ranger's whine was soft, his nose nudging Sophie, who giggled, her fear gone. Sophie took the mic, her small voice ringing. Ranger's my best friend. He saved Brian and loves us. The German shepherd licked her hand, the crowd cheering, many wiping tears. James knelt, hugging her, his voice cracking. You're my miracle, Soph. You and Ranger gave me back my life. Sophie hugged Ranger, whispering, You're the best dog ever. The air hummed with unity. Port Haven reborn through a girl and her protector. Evelyn stepped up, holding a medal, her voice warm. Ranger's a canine legend, and Sophie's his spark. Ranger's Haven will rehab canines and officers because of them. She pinned the medal on Ranger's collar, the crowd erupting, kids waving signs. Ranger saves. Brian, his face pale but eyes sharp, raised a hand, his voice weak but firm. James, Sophie, Ranger, you're Port Haven's heart. James's chest swelled but fear lingered. Rachel, we got Bennett, but that text. Is it over? Ranger's tail flicked, his eyes alert, sensing his unease. Rachel's smile was fierce. We're close, James. Ranger started this, and we'll keep fighting. Rachel joined, her badge glinting, her voice steady. Feds are dismantling the network. Hundreds arrested, dogs coming home from Brazil, Mexico, beyond. Bennett's files exposed Wraith's empire. She nodded at Ranger, awe shining. This dog's why Ethan, Lily, and so many are safe. He's changed everything. The crowd applauded, but James's gaze drifted to Sophie, his heart heavy. The text's warning, a new shadow. Brian still vulnerable. A familiar figure approached. Ethan, 10, holding a toy bone, his father a cop saved by Ranger's unit. Ranger's like my dad's dog, he said, voice shy, tossing the bone. Ranger caught it, bounding back, the crowd laughing, Ethan's joy infectious. Sophie hugged him, her voice bubbly. He saves everybody. James's tears fell, his voice a whisper. You're making miracles, Soph. Evelyn's hand squeezed his, her voice fierce. You both are, James. The celebration buzzed, kids petting Ranger, locals sharing stories, the fun soaring. Rachel pulled James aside, her voice low. We traced the text, a new code name, Phantom, Bennett's mentor, still free, tied to a global syndicate. He's vanished, but we're hunting. James's heart sank, the twist chilling. Phantom had been a shadow at Brian's debrief, probing about the drug case. He planned this, James whispered, his voice trembling. Ranger was always his target. Rachel's radio crackled. A Fed's update. Phantom's signal pinged in Seattle, planning a new shipment. We're moving. Ranger's growl was faint, his nose twitching toward the crowd's edge. A woman in a dark scarf, slipping away, unnoticed by most. James's blood ran cold, his voice a whisper. She's one of them, isn't she? Sophie clung to Ranger, her small voice fierce. Ranger'll find her, Uncle James, like he found the bad nurse. The twist deepened. A volunteer, Lisa Grant, approached, offering Sophie a juice box, her smile too tight. Ranger's bark erupted, sharp, his body lunging at Grant, pinning her to the ground, snarling, but controlled. James's scream pierced the air, his voice fierce. Get away from her! Rachel tackled Grant, her pistol drawn, finding a hidden microchip in her purse, buzzing with a text. Phantom's orders. Take Carter girl. The crowd gasped. Parents shielding kids, cameras rolling. Evelyn cuffed Grant, her face grim. She's a courier, feeding Phantom intel. We're closer. Sophie's tears fell, her voice a sob. Why me, Uncle James? James hugged her, his voice breaking. Because you're our light, Soph, and Ranger's our strength. They can't win. Ranger's whine was a vow, his eyes locked on Grant, his instincts unerring. Rachel's voice was fierce. We've got Phantom's trail, James. Grant's chip has his next drop. Seattle port, tomorrow. Evelyn's eyes blazed, her voice steady. We end this, James, for Brian. James took the mic, his voice heartfelt. Ranger's story is about healing, trusting the instincts that guide us, the bonds that save us. It's yours too. What's your story with a loyal pet? He smiled at Sophie, who tossed a ball, Ranger leaping, the crowd cheering. Join Ranger's Haven. Help us save canines and officers, one heart at a time. Evelyn raised a glass, her voice carrying, to Sophie, James, and Ranger, Port Haven's soul. The crowd toasted, kids mobbing Ranger, James's laughter mingling with Sophie's. Rachel handed him a letter from Ethan, his handwriting shaky. Ranger's my hero. Thank you, Sophie. James's tears fell, clutching it, Ranger's nose on his hand. You knew, boy, he whispered, kissing his head. The celebration faded, but James's fire, the spark Sophie and Ranger had lit, was eternal, a beacon for the battles ahead.